My daughter-in-law had no idea that when she systematically forged my death certificate to expedite her inheritance claim and positioned herself as the grieving widow managing my son's devastating loss while secretly liquidating assets she assumed belonged to a conveniently deceased elderly woman, she was actually targeting Dr. Eleanor Ellie Blackwood, the former chief forensic document examiner for the State Bureau of Investigation, who had personally exposed over 300 cases of document fraud and identity theft, maintained direct relationships with probate, court investigators, and federal forensic specialists, and could make her entire elaborate scheme collapse with a single appearance in the courtroom where she was confidently presenting falsified death records to a judge who had worked with me for over 2 decades on complex fraud cases. Before I reveal how I systematically documented every forged signature, every fabricated medical record, and every fraudulent legal filing that would result in federal charges for document fraud, identity theft, and estate manipulation that would send Rebecca Martinez to federal prison while stripping her of every asset she thought she was about to inherit. Let me paint you the picture of what she saw versus the reality she never suspected. A miscalculation so catastrophic that it would destroy not just her criminal scheme, but her entire life, freedom, and any possibility of escaping the devastating consequences of targeting the one person in the entire state whose professional expertise would guarantee her detection, prosecution, and complete personal destruction. To Rebecca Martinez, my daughter-in-law, I was just Eleanor Blackwood, the frail 73-year-old woman recovering from a serious illness in the remote cabin on Lake Serenity, who had grown increasingly isolated from family activities following my recent health scare, who seemed overwhelmed by the complex medical treatments and legal paperwork that had accumulated during my extended recovery period, who clearly needed her dedicated assistance with managing healthcare decisions and estate planning during what appeared to be my declining months, and who would obviously leave everything to my beloved son Marcus when my carefully observed deterioration finally reached its inevitable conclusion that she was secretly planning to accelerate through systematic document manipulation, legal fraud, and the most audacious identity theft scheme I had encountered in nearly 4 decades of forensic investigation. What Rebecca never discovered, despite her systematic surveillance of my daily routines and careful documentation of my apparent physical limitations, was that Eleanor Blackwood had spent 38 years climbing from small-town notary public at Riverside County Clerk's Office to Chief Forensic Document Examiner for the State Bureau of Investigation, personally, investigating over 300 cases of document fraud, identity theft, and estate manipulation, coordinating with federal law enforcement agencies during major financial crime prosecutions that resulted in hundreds of criminal convictions and millions of dollars in recovered fraudulent assets, and maintaining active professional relationships with probate court judges, forensic specialists, handwriting experts, and federal investigators who specialized in exactly the kind of systematic document fraud and inheritance manipulation that she was about to attempt against someone she assumed was just another vulnerable elderly victim with substantial assets and a trusting family. The irony was so breathtakingly perfect, so cosmically precise in its poetic justice, that if I had written it as fiction, publishers would have rejected it as too unbelievable to be credible. Here was Rebecca Martinez, a paralegal at Hartwell & Associates law firm, systematically planning to commit document fraud, identity theft, and inheritance manipulation against what she perceived as a helpless elderly woman recovering from illness in an isolated lakeside cabin while sitting across from Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, the architect of the very forensic investigation protocols that would expose her scheme, the designer of the document analysis methodologies that would prove her guilt beyond any shadow of doubt, and the person whose professional relationships with probate court officials would ensure that her fraudulent death certificate would trigger immediate investigation rather than the quick inheritance transfer she was counting on. For her financial salvation, Rebecca was attempting to forge documents against someone whose entire professional career had been built on detecting forged documents. She was conducting systematic identity theft against the person who had personally trained federal investigators in recognizing the precise patterns of document manipulation, signature forgery, and estate fraud that she was employing. She was committing inheritance fraud against the individual who had developed the comprehensive forensic analysis techniques that courts use to prosecute document fraud cases, and whose expert testimony had resulted in maximum sentences for hundreds of criminals who had attempted exactly the type of sophisticated legal manipulation that she was executing against someone she assumed was just another isolated elderly woman with valuable assets and no professional connections to detect or prevent systematic document fraud. The beautiful precision of this ironic positioning extended far beyond simple coincidence to represent what could only be described as perfect criminal stupidity, amplified by professional arrogance and cultural assumptions that would prove to be Rebecca's complete undoing. She had spent months carefully researching my apparent vulnerabilities, documenting my supposed isolation and physical limitations, and planning systematic document fraud that would result in my legal death and her financial enrichment, while never suspecting that she was targeting the one person in the entire region whose professional background, forensic expertise, and systematic connections to court officials would guarantee not just her detection and prosecution but the complete destruction of her life, career, and any possibility of ever recovering from the catastrophic consequences of her criminal enterprise. The systematic methodology that Rebecca was using to commit document fraud against me was identical to the criminal patterns that I had spent decades studying, documenting, and exposing through forensic analysis and court testimony. Her signature forgery techniques matched case studies that I had personally developed for federal investigator training programs. Her document manipulation methods followed patterns that I had identified in organized fraud networks. Her coordination of fake death certificates with inheritance planning replicated criminal enterprises that I had successfully exposed through comprehensive forensic investigations, resulting in federal prosecutions and maximum sentences for systematic document fraud and identity theft. Rebecca's professional confidence in her ability to commit undetected document fraud was based on her experience as a paralegal at a respected law firm, her knowledge of legal procedures and estate planning, and her assumption that elderly patients recovering from serious illness represented easy targets for systematic exploitation. What she never realized was that her target was the person who had created the very detection protocols that courts use to identify systematic document fraud by legal professionals. Her criminal methodology was being conducted against someone who had literally written the forensic analysis handbook that investigators use to prosecute organized document crimes involving inheritance fraud and identity theft. The forensic investigation protocols that Rebecca's crimes would trigger had been personally developed by me during my career as Chief Forensic Document Examiner for the State Bureau of Investigation. The document analysis procedures that would prove her guilt had been designed through my coordination with federal prosecutors during major fraud cases. The systematic examination of her forged documents would be conducted using methodologies that I had created specifically for prosecution of organized document fraud networks, involving legal professionals who exploited their knowledge of estate procedures to commit systematic crimes against elderly victims. The specific court officials who would investigate Rebecca's fraudulent death certificate maintained ongoing professional relationships with me that dated back decades of successful collaboration in document fraud prosecution. The probate court judges who would examine her inheritance claims had worked directly with me on similar cases involving systematic legal manipulation and estate theft. The forensic document examiners who would analyze her forged signatures had been trained using protocols that I had developed. The comprehensive exposure of her criminal enterprise would be accomplished using forensic analysis techniques that I had personally designed and implemented against organized document fraud networks. Rebecca's systematic approach to committing document fraud against me demonstrated every single criminal methodology that forensic investigators had identified as characteristic of organized legal crimes involving inheritance fraud and identity theft. Her signature forgery followed patterns that I had documented in federal case studies. Her document fabrication matched techniques that I had identified in comprehensive fraud investigations. Her coordination of systematic legal crimes with inheritance planning replicated criminal enterprises that I had successfully exposed through forensic court proceedings, resulting in maximum sentences and complete asset forfeiture. The timing of Rebecca's escalation from systematic document preparation to comprehensive identity theft coincided perfectly with forensic investigation priorities that I had personally helped establish during my career in document fraud prevention. Court officials were actively seeking evidence of organized fraud networks involving legal professionals, and Rebecca's crimes would provide exactly the type of systematic evidence that prosecutors needed to secure maximum sentences against coordinated criminal enterprises involving inheritance fraud and document manipulation. The professional credentials that Rebecca relied upon to provide cover for her systematic document fraud were exactly the qualifications that made her crimes subject to the most severe penalties available for legal fraud prosecution. Legal professionals who exploited their knowledge of court procedures to commit systematic crimes against elderly clients faced mandatory minimum sentences, permanent professional license revocation, and asset forfeiture procedures that would ensure complete personal and financial destruction. Her paralegal certification, which she assumed provided protection and credibility for her criminal activities, would instead guarantee maximum prosecution and federal prison time. The systematic documentation that Rebecca was maintaining about my apparent isolation and physical limitations was creating exactly the type of evidence pattern that forensic investigators required to prove premeditated document fraud and identity theft. Her detailed records of my supposed medical decline and social withdrawal would provide prosecutors with ironclad proof of systematic criminal planning and coordination that would result in federal charges carrying mandatory sentences without possibility of early release. Rebecca's assumption that elderly patients recovering from serious illness represented ideal targets for systematic document fraud was based on cultural stereotypes and professional arrogance that had been the downfall of hundreds of legal criminals during my career in forensic investigation and court testimony. Her confidence in exploiting what she perceived as physical vulnerability and social isolation was identical to the criminal psychology that I had studied and documented in comprehensive analysis of organized inheritance fraud networks. Her systematic approach to document manipulation matched patterns that I had identified in federal training programs for forensic fraud detection and prosecution. The court database systems that would be used to investigate Rebecca's crimes included comprehensive records of document fraud patterns, criminal methodologies, and prosecution outcomes that I had personally helped develop and maintain during my career in forensic coordination and prosecution support. Her systematic legal crimes would be analyzed using detection protocols that I had created specifically for identification of organized document fraud involving legal professionals targeting elderly clients for financial exploitation. The expert testimony that would ensure Rebecca's conviction would be provided by forensic investigators and document fraud specialists who had worked directly with me during major prosecution cases involving systematic legal crimes and inheritance theft. My professional relationships with forensic experts would guarantee comprehensive testimony about criminal patterns, document analysis, and prosecution strategies that would secure maximum sentences for Rebecca's systematic document fraud and identity theft. Rebecca's coordination of systematic document fraud with inheritance planning demonstrated exactly the type of criminal sophistication that court officials had identified as characteristic of organized inheritance fraud networks involving multiple perpetrators and systematic financial exploitation. Her crimes would trigger comprehensive investigation of potential criminal networks, additional victims, and coordinated criminal enterprises that could result in prosecution of multiple individuals and recovery of millions of dollars in fraudulent inheritance claims and illegal asset transfers. The asset forfeiture procedures that would accompany Rebecca's prosecution had been personally coordinated by Tatishapri Trio, BSc during my career in forensic investigation and fraud prevention. The comprehensive seizure of all property, financial accounts, and personal assets connected to her criminal enterprise would be conducted using protocols that I had helped develop for maximum recovery of criminal profits and compensation for elderly victims of systematic document fraud and inheritance theft. The civil damages that would be recovered from Rebecca's criminal enterprise would be calculated using methodologies that I had developed during my career in forensic prosecution and victim compensation. The comprehensive financial destruction that would result from court-ordered civil penalties, criminal asset forfeiture, and victim compensation requirements would ensure that Rebecca remained permanently impoverished, even if she ever completed her federal prison sentence. The professional consequences for Rebecca's paralegal career would be determined using protocols that I had personally developed for legal fraud prevention and professional licensing oversight. the permanent revocation of her legal credentials, comprehensive investigation of all previous cases under her involvement, and potential identification of additional criminal activities would be conducted using systematic review procedures that I had created specifically for legal fraud investigation and prevention. Coir after da cremamasalf, de precourt max malenties, coir after da cremamasalf for litigation strategies that would be employed against Rebecca's criminal enterprise had been personally developed by me through decades of successful coordination with judicial authorities in document fraud investigation and prosecution. The comprehensive case development, forensic analysis, and prosecution coordination patient that would ensure her conviction represented the culmination patient methodologies that I had spent my entire career developing and refining through successful exposure. Mengame repeat of organized document fraud networks. The media coverage that would accompany Rebecca's prosecution would follow patterns that I had observed during major legal fraud cases involving systematic inheritance theft and document crimes by legal professionals. The comprehensive destruction of her personal and professional reputation, docu-blog, would be amplified by court proceedings that ensured maximum public awareness of document fraud crimes and their consequences for criminal legal professionals who exploited their knowledge to commit systematic theft against vulnerable elderly clients. The educational impact of Rebecca's case would extend beyond individual prosecution to provide training opportunities for legal professionals, court officials, and inheritance fraud prevention specialists who would study her criminal methodology and prosecution as an example of comprehensive judicial response to systematic document fraud and identity theft. Her crimes would become case study material for court training programs that I had personally developed for forensic fraud detection and prevention. The systematic analysis of Rebecca's criminal enterprise would be conducted using forensic investigation protocols that I had created specifically for prosecution of organized document fraud networks involving legal professionals. Her identity theft and inheritance fraud would provide court officials with exactly the type of comprehensive evidence required to secure maximum sentences against systematic legal criminals and expose broader patterns of inheritance fraud and document manipulation operating across multiple jurisdictions. The moment when I realized that Rebecca had unknowingly positioned herself for the most complete professional and personal destruction possible under federal document fraud statutes was when I discovered that her systematic legal crimes matched every single pattern that I had identified as characteristic of organized criminal enterprises deserving maximum prosecution and federal prison sentences without possibility of parole, and that her plan to present my fraudulent death certificate to probate Judge Harrison Mitchell would place her directly in front of the one judge who had worked most closely with me on complex fraud cases and would immediately recognize both the criminal methodology and the supposedly deceased victim, whose forensic expertise had helped him prosecute hundreds of similar cases over the commoted past 25 years of judicial collaboration. To Rebecca Martinez, my daughter-in-law, the woman she observed during her carefully orchestrated visits to my lakeside retreat at 847 Serenity Cove Road, was nothing more than a convenient elderly victim whose apparent physical frailty, social isolation, and obvious confusion about complex legal matters made her the perfect target for systematic document fraud and inheritance manipulation that would finally solve Rebecca's mounting financial crisis, while positioning her as the devoted family member managing a tragic loss with professional competence and heartbreaking dedication to my son Marcus during his time of overwhelming grief. Rebecca's systematic assessment of my vulnerabilities had begun 8 months earlier, during what she presented as concerned family visits to check on my recovery from the cardiac episode that had hospitalized me for 6 weeks at Riverside Medical Center. Her trained paralegal eye had immediately cataloged what she interpreted as clear indicators of cognitive decline and physical dependency that would make systematic document fraud not just possible, but almost criminally easy to execute against someone who appeared increasingly unable to manage complex paperwork, legal decisions, or financial planning without extensive family guidance and professional assistance. The daily observations that Rebecca meticulously recorded in her personal notebook revealed her growing confidence in her assessment of my apparent vulnerabilities. She documented my obvious confusion when reviewing insurance forms, interpreting my careful questions about beneficiary designations as evidence of memory problems rather than recognizing the systematic analysis I was conducting of her responses and legal recommendations. She noted my increasing dependency on written instructions for medication schedules, mistaking my methodical documentation habits for cognitive compensation, rather than understanding that I was creating comprehensive evidence of our interactions for future forensic analysis. Rebecca's professional background as a paralegal at Hartwell & Associates had provided her with extensive experience in estate planning, probate procedures, and the systematic documentation required for inheritance transfers, giving her dangerous confidence in her ability to manipulate legal processes while maintaining plausible cover for her criminal activities. Her knowledge of court procedures, filing requirements, and the typical timeline for estate administration had convinced her that elderly clients represented attractive opportunities for systematic exploitation, especially those who appeared isolated from family oversight and overwhelmed by complex legal requirements. The cultural assumptions that Rebecca brought to her evaluation of my apparent limitations were deeply rooted in ageist stereotypes about elderly women's capabilities, combined with her professional experience observing genuine cases of cognitive decline and family dependency that had created systematic blind spots in her ability to recognize that her target possessed superior legal knowledge, forensic expertise, and professional connections that far exceeded her own paralegal qualifications and criminal planning capabilities. Rebecca's systematic surveillance of my daily routines had been conducted with the methodical precision of someone whose paralegal training had taught her the importance of detailed documentation and evidence collection, but her cultural biases and professional arrogance had prevented her from recognizing that the confused elderly woman she was observing was actually conducting counter-surveillance and evidence gathering, using forensic investigation techniques that she had developed during decades of criminal investigation and document fraud prosecution. The physical appearance that I presented during Rebecca's visits had been carefully calculated to reinforce her preconceived assumptions about elderly vulnerability and medical dependency. My slower movements, which she attributed to age-related decline, were actually the result of ongoing physical therapy following my cardiac procedure. My reliance on reading glasses and magnification tools, which she interpreted as vision problems affecting my ability to review documents, was standard practice for detailed document examination that I had used throughout my forensic career to identify minute irregularities in signatures, printing, and paper composition. Rebecca's documentation of my apparent social isolation included detailed observations about my limited visitor schedule, my reduced participation in community activities, and my apparent withdrawal from the legal and professional networks that had been central to my career before retirement. What she failed to understand was that my decreased social activity was a deliberate choice to maintain privacy during my health recovery, while my professional relationships remained active through secure digital communication systems and encrypted correspondence that she never detected during her surveillance activities. The financial vulnerability that Rebecca assumed she had identified was based on her observation of my apparent confusion about investment statements, insurance procedures, and estate planning documents that seemed to overwhelm my cognitive capabilities and create obvious dependency on family assistance for complex financial decision-making. Her systematic misinterpretation of my careful questioning about financial procedures as evidence of confusion rather than professional analysis would prove to be one of her most catastrophic miscalculations in targeting someone whose expertise in financial fraud detection exceeded her own understanding of legal procedures. Rebecca's assessment of my technological limitations was based on her observation of my apparent struggle with digital devices, online banking systems, and electronic communication platforms that seemed beyond my cognitive capabilities and technical understanding. She interpreted my preference for paper documents and telephone communication as evidence of generational technology gaps, rather than recognizing that my systematic approach to evidence preservation and secure communication was based on decades of forensic investigation experience and federal security protocols that required careful documentation and encrypted correspondence. The emotional manipulation techniques that Rebecca employed during her visits were designed to exploit what she perceived as my increasing dependency on family support and my obvious gratitude for her professional guidance during a period of physical recovery and apparent cognitive confusion. Her systematic use of legal terminology, complex procedural explanations, and authoritative recommendations created psychological pressure that she assumed would prevent careful analysis while building my trust in her expertise and dedication to my welfare and estate planning needs. Rebecca's strategic timing of her increased involvement in my legal affairs coincided with what she presented to Marcus as my accelerating cognitive decline that required immediate family intervention to prevent dangerous legal errors, missed filing deadlines, and poor estate planning decisions that could result in significant financial losses or complex probate complications requiring expensive legal intervention and prolonged court proceedings that would drain family resources and create unnecessary stress during an already difficult period. The systematic approach that Rebecca used to build my apparent dependency on her legal expertise included gradually increasing her involvement in document review, court filing preparation, and family communication about my legal status, while documenting my grateful acceptance of her professional guidance, and my obvious relief at having expert legal support during what appeared to be an increasingly overwhelming period of health decline and legal complexity that exceeded my apparent cognitive capabilities. Rebecca's documentation of my apparent memory problems included detailed records of my inability to remember previous legal discussions, my confusion about document contents and signing procedures, and my increasing reliance on her written summaries and legal explanations that demonstrated progressive cognitive decline requiring comprehensive family oversight and professional legal management to prevent costly errors and protect family financial interests during my apparent final months. The professional authority that Rebecca projected during our legal discussions was based on her paralegal credentials and law firm experience, which provided credibility for her observations about my declining capabilities, while positioning her as the obvious solution for increasing legal supervision and family coordination of my estate planning needs. Her systematic use of legal terminology, procedural requirements, and court deadlines created an atmosphere of urgency and complexity that she assumed would prevent independent verification or outside legal consultation. Rebecca's strategic presentation of my apparent legal vulnerabilities to Marcus emphasized the progressive nature of my condition, the increasing risks associated with independent legal decision-making, and the urgent need for family intervention to prevent dangerous legal errors or estate planning mistakes that could result in significant financial losses, tax penalties, or probate complications requiring immediate professional legal intervention and comprehensive family oversight of my remaining legal capacity. The specific examples that Rebecca provided to Marcus of my apparent legal confusion included detailed descriptions of my inability to understand estate planning concepts, my forgetfulness about previous legal decisions, and my apparent anxiety about legal procedures that suggested increasing mental instability and legal incapacity, requiring comprehensive family protection and professional legal management to ensure appropriate estate planning and asset protection during my apparent decline. Rebecca's professional experience with elderly estate planning clients had provided her with detailed knowledge of genuine cognitive decline patterns, family dynamics, and legal capacity issues that enabled her to create convincing simulations of legal confusion while maintaining plausible explanations for any inconsistencies in my behavior or apparent legal understanding that might suggest deliberate deception or strategic analysis, rather than genuine cognitive decline and legal incapacity. The family meetings that Rebecca initiated about my increasing legal needs were strategically designed to build consensus about the necessity of comprehensive legal supervision, while positioning herself as the obvious choice for increased involvement in my estate planning due to her professional legal credentials and her demonstrated commitment to my welfare and family financial protection. Her systematic presentation of evidence about my declining legal capacity created family pressure for immediate intervention and increased professional oversight. Rebecca's coordination of my apparent legal incapacity with her systematic preparation for estate administration demonstrated sophisticated criminal planning that combined her professional knowledge of probate procedures with her calculated assessment of my vulnerabilities and her strategic positioning within the family structure to ensure maximum control over the inheritance process, while maintaining cover as a devoted family member providing essential legal protection during my apparent final months. The systematic documentation that Rebecca maintained about my apparent legal confusion and increasing dependency created comprehensive records that would support her narrative of progressive cognitive decline affecting my legal capacity and requiring family intervention in estate planning and legal decision-making to ensure appropriate asset protection and inheritance transfer according to my apparent wishes and family financial planning goals. Rebecca's assessment of my apparent legal naivete was based on her observation of my trusting acceptance of her explanations about probate procedures, estate planning requirements, and legal filing deadlines that suggested cognitive decline affecting my ability to understand complex legal concepts and requiring family protection against potential exploitation by unscrupulous legal professionals or financial advisors who might take advantage of my apparent confusion and vulnerability during my declining months. The strategic timing of Rebecca's documentation of my apparent legal crisis coincided with important family financial decisions, estate planning deadlines, and insurance policy renewals that would require my signature and informed consent for legal changes that could significantly affect inheritance planning and asset distribution. Her systematic record-keeping about my cognitive decline provided justification for family involvement in these critical legal and financial decisions, while positioning her as the essential legal coordinator. Rebecca's systematic manipulation of family perceptions about my declining legal capacity included strategic coordination of her observations with Marcus's natural concerns about my aging, his emotional investment in my welfare, and his professional obligations that limited his ability to provide direct supervision of my daily legal needs and estate planning requirements. Her legal expertise provided professional validation for his concerns, while positioning her as the obvious solution for increasing legal oversight and family coordination. The comprehensive documentation that Rebecca maintained about my apparent legal incapacity, cognitive decline, and increasing dependency created systematic evidence that would support legal proceedings for conservatorship, guardianship arrangements, and estate planning modifications that would give Marcus and Rebecca comprehensive authority over my legal decisions and financial management during what appeared to be progressive mental deterioration requiring professional intervention and family protection from potential exploitation or poor decision-making. The cultural stereotypes that reinforced Rebecca's assessment of my legal vulnerability included ageist assumptions about elderly women's understanding of complex legal procedures, gender-based prejudices about financial decision-making capabilities, and professional arrogance based on her paralegal training that created systematic blind spots preventing recognition of my superior legal knowledge and forensic expertise. Her confidence in exploiting what she perceived as legal confusion was identical to the criminal psychology that I had studied and documented in comprehensive analysis of organized estate fraud networks targeting elderly clients with valuable assets and apparent cognitive limitations. The moment when Rebecca's systematic assessment of my apparent legal vulnerabilities reached its final phase was when she began coordinating with Dr. Patricia Hendricks at Riverside Medical Center about my declining condition and the medical documentation that would be necessary to support the death certificate that she was already preparing to file, never suspecting that her target's forensic expertise in document analysis would enable immediate detection of every forged signature, fabricated medical entry, and fraudulent legal filing that she was systematically creating to support the most audacious identity theft scheme in the history of the methodical precision with which Rebecca Martinez executed her document fraud scheme against what she believed was a vulnerable elderly woman demonstrated the dangerous combination of professional legal knowledge and criminal intent that had been brewing during the 18 months since her personal financial crisis had reached catastrophic proportions, forcing her to view her paralegal skills not as tools for legitimate legal assistance but as weapons for systematic exploitation of family relationships and elderly vulnerability that would solve her mounting debt problems through the most audacious inheritance theft in Riverside County history. Rebecca's financial desperation had begun 2 years earlier when her gambling addiction, carefully hidden from Marcus and the rest of our family, had resulted in accumulated casino debts exceeding $180,000 to multiple creditors who were no longer accepting payment plans or extensions. Her systematic theft from client trust accounts at Hartwell and Associates had been discovered during a routine audit, resulting in her immediate termination, professional investigation by the State Bar Association, and pending criminal charges that would destroy her legal career while requiring immediate restitution of $95,000 in stolen funds that she had already lost through continued gambling and desperate attempts to recover her losses. The timeline of Rebecca's criminal planning had been carefully calculated to coincide with what she perceived as my increasing physical vulnerability following my cardiac episode and hospitalization. Her initial assessment visits during my recovery period had been designed to evaluate my potential as a target for systematic exploitation, while building the family relationships necessary to gain access to my legal documents, financial information, and estate planning materials that would be essential for comprehensive identity theft and inheritance fraud. Rebecca's professional background in estate planning and probate procedures at Hartwell and Associates had provided her with detailed knowledge of the legal requirements for death certificate filing, inheritance documentation, and probate court procedures that would be necessary to execute systematic inheritance fraud without triggering immediate investigation or suspicious scrutiny from court officials. Her experience with legitimate estate administration had taught her exactly which procedures could be manipulated, which documents could be forged, and which court deadlines could be exploited to accelerate inheritance transfers before comprehensive verification or family notification could expose fraudulent documentation. Upper fee or DIFDAX, upper fee or DIFDB court of fraud. The systematic approach that Rebecca employed for document preparation included careful study of authentic death certificates from Riverside Medical Center, detailed analysis of Dr. Patricia Hendricks's signature patterns and medical documentation style, and comprehensive research into the specific legal requirements for emergency probate proceedings that would allow rapid estate administration without the normal waiting periods or extensive court oversight that might reveal fraudulent documentation or suspicious circumstances surrounding my alleged death. Rebecca's coordination with Dr. Hendricks represented the most dangerous aspect of her criminal scheme, involving systematic manipulation of a licensed medical professional who had been treating my cardiac condition during the months following my hospitalization. Dr. Hendricks' legitimate medical relationship with me provided the perfect cover for Rebecca's gradual introduction of fabricated health concerns, exaggerated medical complications, and systematic documentation of my allegedly declining condition that would support the medical necessity for the death certificate she was planning to forge, using stolen hospital letterhead and fraudulent medical records. The specific methodology that Rebecca used to establish medical credibility for her fraud included systematic scheduling of medical appointments where she accompanied me as my concerned daughter-in-law, strategic introduction of false symptoms and health concerns during medical consultations, and careful documentation of Dr. Hendricks' medical notes and treatment recommendations that she would later manipulate to support her fabricated narrative of my rapidly deteriorating health and imminent death from cardiac complications related to my previous hospitalization. Rebecca's manipulation of Dr. Hendricks relied heavily on her paralegal experience with medical legal documentation and her understanding of how healthcare professionals could be systematically deceived through careful presentation of fabricated family concerns, strategic emphasis on my apparent cognitive decline, and systematic coordination of false medical emergencies that would create the paper trail necessary to support fraudulent death certification without triggering suspicious medical investigation or comprehensive verification of her claims about my condition. The forged medical records that Rebecca systematically created included detailed fabrication of cardiac monitoring reports showing progressive heart failure, falsified laboratory results indicating systematic organ dysfunction, and comprehensive manipulation of Dr. Hendricks' treatment notes to support a narrative of rapid medical decline that would justify emergency death certification without the normal medical investigation or autopsy requirements that might expose the fraudulent nature of her documentation and criminal manipulation of legitimate medical records. Rebecca's research into death certificate requirements had revealed that emergency death certification could be expedited through proper medical documentation and family coordination, especially in cases involving elderly patients with documented cardiac conditions and established medical relationships with treating physicians. Her systematic study of probate court procedures had identified specific legal mechanisms that would allow rapid estate administration and inheritance transfer without extensive court oversight or family notification requirements that might expose fraudulent documentation before assets could be transferred and liquidated. The timing of Rebecca's escalation to active document fraud coincided with what she presented to Dr. Hendricks as my catastrophic deterioration during a supposed medical emergency at my lakeside cabin, where she claimed to have discovered me in cardiac distress requiring immediate emergency medical intervention. Her fabricated narrative of unsuccessful resuscitation attempts and my alleged death from cardiac arrest provided the medical justification for emergency death certification without hospital verification or comprehensive medical investigation that might reveal the fraudulent nature of her claims. Rebecca's systematic preparation for inheritance fraud included detailed research into my financial accounts, investment portfolios, and real estate holdings that she had systematically cataloged during her months of family visits and legal assistance. Her paralegal training had taught her exactly which financial institutions would require death certificates for asset transfer, which investment accounts could be liquidated rapidly without extensive verification, and which real estate transactions could be expedited through emergency probate proceedings before comprehensive court oversight could expose fraudulent documentation. The forged death certificate that Rebecca prepared using stolen Riverside Medical Center letterhead included carefully replicated signatures of Dr. Hendricks, fabricated medical examiner certifications, and systematic manipulation of official state documentation that would provide legal authority for immediate inheritance claims and asset transfer without the normal waiting periods or verification procedures that might expose the fraudulent nature of her documentation and criminal exploitation of legitimate medical and legal processes. Rebecca's coordination of her document fraud with systematic inheritance planning included preparation of falsified estate documentation claiming authority as Marcus's representative in inheritance matters, forged power of attorney documents providing legal authority for asset liquidation, and comprehensive manipulation of probate court filings that would expedite inheritance transfer without family notification or court oversight that might reveal the fraudulent nature of her claims about my death and her authority to manage estate assets. The systematic liquidation plan that Rebecca had developed for stolen inheritance assets included immediate transfer of financial accounts to offshore banking systems, rapid conversion of investment portfolios to untraceable cryptocurrency assets, and comprehensive preparation for international relocation that would place her beyond the reach of law enforcement investigation once her document fraud and identity theft had been discovered and reported to federal authorities for prosecution. Rebecca's professional knowledge of legal procedure had taught her that successful inheritance fraud required systematic coordination of multiple fraudulent documents, careful timing of legal filings to avoid suspicious oversight, and comprehensive manipulation of family relationships to prevent early detection of document fraud before assets could be transferred and liquidated. Her paralegal experience with legitimate estate administration provided dangerous expertise in identifying which legal procedures could be exploited and which court officials might be susceptible to systematic deception through professional presentation of fraudulent documentation. The psychological manipulation that Rebecca employed to maintain family confidence in her legal assistants included systematic presentation of fabricated medical emergencies requiring immediate legal intervention, strategic emphasis on my apparent cognitive decline affecting my ability to make informed legal decisions, and careful coordination of false time pressures and legal deadlines that would prevent comprehensive verification or independent legal consultation that might expose the fraudulent nature of her documentation and criminal manipulation of family relationships. Rebecca's systematic approach to avoiding detection included careful study of forensic document analysis techniques used in fraud investigation, detailed research into law enforcement procedures for document fraud prosecution, and comprehensive preparation of cover stories and alibis that would provide plausible explanations for any irregularities in her forged documentation that might be discovered during initial investigation before she could complete asset liquidation and international relocation. The specific security measures that Rebecca implemented to protect her criminal enterprise included use of encrypted communication systems for coordination with offshore financial contacts, systematic destruction of evidence linking her to document preparation and signature forgery, and careful manipulation of digital records and electronic communications that might provide forensic evidence of her criminal planning and systematic exploitation of family relationships for inheritance fraud. Rebecca's coordination with international money laundering networks had been established through her gambling connections and criminal associates who specialized in rapid asset transfer and identity relocation for individuals fleeing law enforcement investigation. Her systematic preparation for post-fraud relocation included establishment of false identity documentation, preparation of offshore banking relationships, and comprehensive planning for permanent disappearance that would prevent law enforcement recovery of stolen assets or criminal prosecution for document fraud and inheritance theft. The backup plans that Rebecca had developed for her criminal enterprise included multiple contingency strategies for avoiding detection if her initial fraud attempt was discovered before asset liquidation could be completed. Her systematic preparation of alternative forged documents, secondary identity theft schemes, and emergency relocation procedures demonstrated the comprehensive nature of her criminal planning and her understanding of the serious federal penalties she would face if her document fraud and inheritance manipulation were discovered and reported to law enforcement authorities. Rebecca's professional arrogance and systematic, bold underestimation of potential opposition to her criminal scheme had prevented her from conducting comprehensive background investigation of her target that might have revealed the catastrophic mistake she was making in attempting document fraud against someone whose forensic expertise and professional relationships would guarantee immediate detection of her forged documents. and systematic exposure of her entire criminal enterprise through comprehensive federal investigation and prosecution. The systematic escalation of Rebecca's criminal activities, from initial family manipulation to comprehensive document fraud and identity theft, demonstrated the dangerous progression of criminal thinking that had been enabled by her professional legal knowledge and her systematic exploitation of family relationships and elderly vulnerability for financial gain. Her coordination of multiple fraudulent schemes involving medical manipulation, legal document forgery, and inheritance theft represented organized criminal activity that would result in federal prosecution and maximum sentences under multiple fraud statutes. Rebecca's systematic preparation for presenting fraudulent death certification to probate judge Harrison Mitchell included detailed research into court procedures for emergency estate administration, careful study of the judge's previous rulings in similar inheritance cases, and comprehensive preparation of supporting documentation that would provide legal justification for rapid inheritance transfer without the extensive verification or family notification that might expose the fraudulent nature of her claims about my death and her authority to represent family interests in estate matters. The moment when Rebecca's systematic criminal planning reached its final phase was when she scheduled the emergency probate hearing for Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. in Riverside County Superior Court, confident that her forged death certificate and fabricated medical documentation would convince Judge Mitchell to authorize immediate inheritance transfer to Marcus, with Rebecca positioned as his legal representative for asset liquidation, never suspecting that her presentation of fraudulent documents to the court would take place in front of the one judge who had worked most closely with me on complex fraud investigations and would immediately recognize both the criminal methodology and the supposedly deceased forensic expert whose document analysis in criminal prosecution and court proceedings. What Rebecca Martinez never discovered, despite her systematic surveillance of my daily routines and methodical documentation of my apparent cognitive limitations and physical dependencies, was that Eleanor Blackwood had spent 38 years transforming from a small-town notary public at Riverside County Clerk's office into the most respected forensic document examiner in the state's criminal justice system, personally developing the analytical methodologies that courts relied upon to detect sophisticated document fraud, training federal investigators in the recognition of organized forgery networks, and establishing the professional relationships with judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officials that had resulted in the successful prosecution of over 300 cases involving exactly the type of systematic document manipulation and inheritance fraud that Rebecca was systematically planning to execute against someone she assumed was just another vulnerable elderly woman with valuable assets and no professional connections to detect or prevent comprehensive criminal exploitation. My professional journey in forensic document analysis had begun in 1985 as a young county clerk who possessed an unusual talent for detecting inconsistencies in handwriting, signature patterns, and document authentication that had attracted the attention of District Attorney Michael Crawford during a complex fraud investigation involving forged real estate deeds and systematic property theft. My natural ability to identify minute variations in pen pressure, stroke patterns, and paper composition had led to my recruitment as a consultant for the district attorney's office, where my analyses had provided crucial evidence for the successful prosecution of an organized crime network that had been systematically stealing property through document forgery and identity theft. The educational foundation that supported my forensic expertise included a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from California State University, specialized training in forensic document examination from the American Board of Forensic Document Examiners, advanced certification in handwriting analysis and signature authentication from the International Association of Forensic Document Examiners, and comprehensive training in federal evidence procedures from the FBI Academy at Quantico. These credentials had been systematically accumulated during evening and weekend programs while maintaining my full-time position at the county clerk's office, demonstrating the dedication and analytical rigor that would later characterize my approach to complex criminal investigations. My transition from county clerk to professional forensic examiner had occurred during the late 1980s, when the increasing sophistication of document fraud in California had created demand for specialized expertise in detecting organized forgery networks and systematic identity theft operations. The California Attorney General's office had recruited me to establish the state's first comprehensive forensic document analysis unit, where I developed standardized procedures for document authentication, signature verification, and paper analysis that became the foundation for forensic document examination throughout the Western United States. The scope of my professional responsibilities as Chief Forensic Document Examiner for the State Bureau of Investigation had included oversight of all document fraud investigations across California's criminal justice system, coordination with federal agencies during multi-jurisdictional cases involving organized crime networks, development of training programs for law enforcement personnel and court officials, and expert testimony in over 200 federal and state court proceedings involving complex document fraud, inheritance theft, and systematic identity manipulations. The specific cases that I had personally investigated during my career included the Riverside County Real Estate Fraud Network, which involves systematic forgery of property deeds affecting over $50 million in fraudulent transfers, the Orange County Identity Theft Ring, which used forged documents to steal the identities of elderly residents for systematic financial exploitation, the San Diego Inheritance Fraud Conspiracy, which involved coordinated document forgery and medical manipulation to accelerate inheritance transfers through fraudulent death certificates, and the Los Angeles. My expertise in forensic document analysis had encompassed every aspect of document authentication and fraud detection, including microscopic analysis of paper composition and ink chemistry, detailed examination of handwriting patterns and signature authentication, comprehensive investigation of printing techniques and document production methods, systematic analysis of aging patterns and document deterioration, and advanced technical examination using specialized equipment for detecting alterations, erasures, and systematic document manipulation that was The professional recognition that I had received for my contributions to forensic science included the California Attorney General's Award for Excellence in Criminal Investigation, the Federal Bureau of Investigation Director's Recognition for Outstanding Service in Document Fraud Prevention, the American Academy of Forensic Sciences Distinguished Service Award, and the International Association of Forensic Document Examiners Lifetime Achievement Award for advancing the scientific methodology of document authentication and fraud detection through innovative analytical techniques and comprehensive training programs for law enforcement. The federal relationships that I had developed during my career included ongoing coordination with the FBI's Document Analysis Unit, which specialized in complex federal fraud investigations, the Secret Service Forensic Document Laboratory, which handled cases involving government document forgery and identity theft, the Postal Inspection Service Fraud Division, which investigated mail fraud and systematic identity theft schemes, and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, which prosecuted tax fraud involving forged documents and systematic financial manipulation of elderly victims. My consulting work following retirement from the State Bureau of Investigation had included expert witness testimony in high-profile federal cases involving organized document fraud networks, development of advanced training programs for international law enforcement agencies, consultation with major corporations on document security and fraud prevention protocols, and ongoing coordination with academic institutions on research projects advancing the scientific methodology of forensic document analysis and authentication procedures. The specialized equipment and analytical capabilities that I had access to through my professional relationships included high-resolution microscopy systems for detailed examination of paper fibers and ink composition, spectroscopic analysis equipment for determining the chemical composition of inks and paper materials, digital imaging systems for capturing and analyzing minute details invisible to casual observation, and database access to comprehensive records of paper manufacturers, ink formulations, and printing techniques that could definitively establish the origin and authenticity of questioned documents. The database systems that I had helped develop during my career included the California Document Fraud Database, which maintained comprehensive records of known forgery techniques and criminal methodologies, the Western States Handwriting Analysis Database, which contained over 100,000 authenticated signature samples for comparison analysis, the Federal Document Authentication Database, which provided access to government security features and anti-counterfeiting measures, and the International Forensic Document Database, which coordinated information about sophisticated forgery techniques and My expertise in signature authentication had been developed through analysis of over 50,000 questioned signatures during my career, including detailed study of natural variation patterns in authentic signatures, systematic analysis of simulation techniques used by skilled forgers, comprehensive investigation of pressure patterns and stroke dynamics that revealed deception, and advanced technical analysis using specialized equipment that could detect microscopic irregularities invisible to conventional examination methods but definitive in proving document forgery and systematic fraud. The training programs that I had developed for law enforcement agencies included comprehensive courses in basic document authentication for patrol officers and detectives, advanced training in signature analysis for specialized fraud investigators, expert-level instruction in microscopic document examination for forensic laboratory personnel, and continuing education programs for prosecutors and judges on the legal standards for admitting forensic document evidence in criminal proceedings involving complex fraud cases. The research publications that I had authored during my career included peer-reviewed articles in forensic science journals on advanced analytical techniques for document authentication, comprehensive manuals on signature verification procedures for law enforcement agencies, technical papers on the detection of systematic document fraud in inheritance cases, and training materials used by federal agencies for investigating organized forgery networks and identity theft conspiracies targeting elderly victims and vulnerable populations. And vulnerable populations. The professional associations that provided ongoing access to current developments in forensic science included membership in the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, the International Association of Forensic Document Examiners, the California Association of Criminalists, and the Federal Law Enforcement Training Association. These organizations provided regular updates on new analytical techniques, emerging fraud methodologies, and legal developments affecting the admissibility and presentation of forensic document evidence in criminal proceedings. The continuing education requirements that I maintained for my professional certifications included annual training in advanced analytical techniques, regular updates on legal standards for expert testimony, ongoing education in new fraud methodologies and detection techniques, and systematic review of current literature in forensic science and criminal investigation. These requirements ensured that my expertise remained current with developing criminal techniques and advancing scientific methodology in document authentication and fraud detection. The expert witness qualifications that I maintained included federal court certification in forensic document analysis, specialized knowledge of California and federal evidence requirements, comprehensive understanding of legal standards for expert testimony in criminal proceedings, and extensive experience in presenting complex forensic evidence to judges and juries in high-profile fraud cases. These qualifications had enabled regular testimony in federal court proceedings and coordination with prosecutors during major organized crime investigations. The professional network that I had developed during my career included federal investigators specializing in document fraud and identity theft, prosecutors experienced in complex financial crime cases, forensic laboratory personnel with expertise in advanced analytical techniques, and academic researchers, advancing the scientific methodology of document authentication and fraud detection. These relationships provided permanent access to cutting-edge analytical capabilities and prosecution support that could respond immediately to sophisticated fraud schemes and organized criminal enterprises. The systematic approach that I had developed for forensic document analysis included comprehensive examination of questioned documents using multiple analytical techniques, detailed comparison with known authentic samples and database records, systematic documentation of findings using standardized reporting procedures, and coordination with law enforcement agencies and prosecutors for effective presentation of forensic evidence in criminal proceedings. This methodology had resulted in successful prosecution of hundreds of document fraud cases and recovery of millions of dollars in stolen assets and fraudulent claims. The recognition that Rebecca's document fraud scheme represented organized criminal activity had triggered immediate activation of forensic analysis protocols that I had developed during my career. Her forged death certificate, fabricated medical records, and systematic inheritance documentation matched patterns that I had identified in other cases of coordinated fraud networks involving legal professionals and medical practitioners targeting elderly victims for systematic financial exploitation and identity theft. The federal case development that Rebecca's crimes would trigger represented the culmination of analytical methodologies that I had spent decades developing and refining through successful prosecution of organized document fraud networks. Her systematic forgery and inheritance manipulation would provide prosecutors with exactly the type of comprehensive evidence required to secure maximum sentences against coordinated criminal enterprises and expose broader patterns of elder abuse and document fraud operating across multiple jurisdictions. The comprehensive destruction that awaited Rebecca's criminal enterprise represented the application of forensic analysis techniques that I had personally developed and implemented against organized fraud networks during my career. Her systematic document manipulation had created exactly the type of evidence pattern that forensic investigators required to build comprehensive cases against coordinated criminal enterprises, involving systematic exploitation of elderly victims for financial gain through sophisticated document forgery and legal manipulation. The The moment when I realized that Rebecca's systematic document fraud matched patterns from major federal cases that I had personally investigated was when I discovered that her forgery techniques, medical record fabrication methods, and inheritance coordination strategies were identical to organized criminal enterprises that had been successfully prosecuted through comprehensive forensic analysis, resulting in maximum federal sentences for systematic elder abuse and document fraud involving coordinated networks of legal and medical professionals exploiting their credentials to commit sophisticated crimes against vulnerable elderly populations. The comprehensive forensic arsenal that Rebecca Martinez unknowingly challenged when she decided to commit document fraud against Dr. Eleanor Blackwood represented the culmination of nearly 4 decades of specialized training, cutting-edge analytical equipment, and systematic expertise in detecting exactly the type of sophisticated forgery techniques that she was employing in her systematic inheritance theft scheme, creating a scenario where every single element of her criminal methodology would be immediately exposed through forensic analysis procedures that I had personally developed, refined, and implemented during hundreds of successful prosecutions involving organized. The microscopic analysis capabilities that I maintained through my professional relationships included access to high-resolution scanning electron microscopy systems capable of examining document materials at magnifications exceeding 100,000x, revealing microscopic details of paper fiber composition, ink particle distribution, and pen pressure variations that were completely invisible to casual observation but provided definitive proof of document authenticity or systematic forgery through comparative analysis with authenticated samples and comprehensive database records of legitimate document production methods and materials. My expertise in signature authentication had been developed through systematic analysis of over 75,000 question signatures during my career, including detailed study of natural variation patterns that occurred in authentic signatures under different writing conditions, comprehensive investigation of simulation techniques employed by skilled forgers attempting to replicate authentic signatures, systematic analysis of pen pressure dynamics and stroke velocity patterns that revealed conscious deception versus natural writing behavior, and advanced technical examination using specialized pressure-sensitive equipment that could detect The spectroscopic analysis equipment that I had access to through federal laboratory relationships included infrared spectroscopy systems for determining the chemical composition of ink formulations and paper treatments, mass spectrometry equipment for identifying specific molecular compounds in question documents, X-ray fluorescence analyzers for detecting metallic components in inks and printing materials, and ultraviolet examination systems for revealing alterations, erasures, and systematic document modifications that were invisible under normal lighting conditions but could be definitively proven through technical analysis and forensic documentation. My specialized knowledge of paper authentication included comprehensive understanding of paper manufacturing processes and quality control procedures, detailed knowledge of watermark production techniques and security features used by legitimate document producers, systematic expertise in analyzing paper aging patterns and environmental degradation that could establish document creation dates and storage conditions, and advanced technical capability in detecting paper substitution, document reconstruction, and systematic manipulation of authentic documents through addition or removal of original content. The digital imaging systems that I had access to through my professional network included high-resolution documentation cameras capable of capturing minute details at extreme magnifications, specialized lighting systems for revealing latent writing impressions and document alterations, infrared and ultraviolet imaging equipment for detecting ink variations and paper modifications invisible to conventional photography, and computer enhancement software for analyzing digital images and identifying systematic patterns of document manipulation and forgery techniques. My expertise in handwriting analysis encompassed systematic study of individual writing characteristics and natural variation patterns, comprehensive understanding of how medical conditions, age-related changes, and emotional stress affected authentic writing samples, detailed knowledge of simulation techniques used by skilled forgers to replicate authentic handwriting, and advanced analytical capability in detecting subtle indicators of conscious deception versus natural writing behavior through examination of pen pressure, stroke dynamics, and systematic deviation from established. The database access that I maintained through federal relationships included the FBI's National Fraudulent Document Database, containing over 500,000 authenticated samples of legitimate documents and known forgery examples, the Secret Service Counterfeit Detection Database, providing comprehensive information about government security features and anti-counterfeiting measures, the International Association of Forensic Document Examiners Database, containing research data on emerging forgery techniques and criminal methodologies, and My specialized training in ink analysis included comprehensive knowledge of ink chemistry and manufacturing processes, detailed understanding of how different ink formulations behaved under various analytical techniques, systematic expertise in detecting ink substitution and systematic document alteration through chemical analysis, and advanced technical capability in determining the relative age of ink applications through chromatographic analysis and chemical testing procedures that could establish the sequence of document creation and identify systematic forgery and document manipulation. The pressure analysis equipment that I had access to through professional relationships included electronic writing tablets capable of recording and analyzing pen pressure variations during signature creation, specialized measurement devices for detecting microscopic variations in writing pressure that indicated conscious simulation versus natural writing behavior, computer analysis systems for comparing pressure patterns between questioned signatures and authenticated samples, and advanced technical equipment for examining indented writing impressions and pressure transfer patterns that revealed systematic document manipulation. My expertise in document dating included comprehensive knowledge of paper aging processes and environmental degradation patterns, systematic understanding of how ink formulations changed over time and reacted to different storage conditions, detailed knowledge of printing technology evolution and the technical characteristics of documents produced during specific time periods, and advanced analytical capability in detecting systematic document alteration through anachronistic materials, ink formulations, or printing techniques that were inconsistent with claimed document creation dates. The forensic photography equipment that I maintained included macro lens systems capable of extreme close-up documentation of microscopic document details, specialized lighting equipment for revealing latent writing impressions and systematic document alterations, infrared and ultraviolet photography systems for detecting ink variations and paper modifications, and digital documentation systems for creating comprehensive photographic records of forensic analysis results that could be effectively presented in court proceedings and expert testimony. My systematic approach to forensic document examination included comprehensive visual examination using specialized magnification equipment, detailed microscopic analysis of paper fibers and ink composition, systematic comparison with authenticated samples and database records, chemical testing for ink analysis and paper authentication, digital imaging for documentation and enhancement of forensic findings, and coordination with federal laboratories for advanced technical analysis requiring specialized equipment and expertise not available through standard. The expert testimony capabilities that I had developed during my career included extensive experience in presenting complex forensic evidence to judges and juries in high-profile criminal cases, systematic training in effective courtroom communication and visual presentation of technical evidence, comprehensive understanding of legal standards for expert witness testimony and evidence admissibility, and proven track record of successful testimony in over 200 federal and state court proceedings involving sophisticated document fraud and organized criminal enterprises. My knowledge of criminal forgery techniques included comprehensive study of simulation methods used by skilled forgers to replicate authentic signatures, detailed understanding of systematic document alteration techniques including erasure, substitution, and content modification, systematic analysis of printing and reproduction methods used to create fraudulent documents, and advanced expertise in detecting organized forgery networks and coordinated criminal enterprises involving multiple perpetrators and sophisticated criminal methodologies. The legal coordination capabilities that I maintained through professional relationships included direct access to federal prosecutors specializing in document fraud and elder abuse cases, ongoing communication with specialized law enforcement units, investigating organized crime networks, systematic coordination with court officials and judges experienced in complex fraud prosecutions, and comprehensive understanding of federal and state legal procedures for document fraud prosecution and asset recovery from criminal enterprises. My expertise in estate fraud detection included specialized knowledge of inheritance document requirements and authentication procedures, comprehensive understanding of probate court processes and the legal standards for document verification, systematic analysis of fraudulent estate documentation and systematic inheritance theft schemes, and detailed knowledge of the criminal methodologies used by organized networks to exploit elderly victims through systematic document manipulation and legal fraud. The training programs that I had developed for law enforcement agencies included comprehensive instruction in basic document authentication for patrol officers and detectives, advanced courses in signature analysis and handwriting examination for specialized fraud investigators, expert-level training in microscopic document analysis for forensic laboratory personnel, and continuing education programs for prosecutors and judges on the effective presentation of forensic document evidence in criminal proceedings. My research and development work in forensic science included ongoing investigation of emerging forgery techniques and criminal methodologies, systematic development of new analytical procedures for detecting sophisticated document fraud, coordination with academic institutions on advancing the scientific methodology of forensic document analysis, and publication of research findings in peer-reviewed forensic science journals and professional training materials used by law enforcement agencies internationally. The quality assurance procedures that I had implemented during my career included systematic validation of analytical techniques through blind testing and peer review, comprehensive documentation of all forensic examinations using standardized reporting procedures, regular calibration and maintenance of analytical equipment to ensure accurate and reliable results, and ongoing participation in proficiency testing programs to maintain the highest standards of forensic analysis and expert testimony. My coordination with international law enforcement agencies included participation in joint investigations involving cross-border document fraud networks, training programs for foreign law enforcement personnel on advanced analytical techniques, research collaboration with international forensic laboratories on emerging criminal methodologies, and expert consultation on high-profile international cases involving sophisticated document forgery and organized criminal enterprises. The systematic approach that I had developed for forensic case management included comprehensive documentation of all analytical procedures and findings, systematic coordination with law enforcement agencies and prosecutors throughout the investigation process, detailed preparation of expert testimony and courtroom presentation of forensic evidence, and ongoing case follow-up to ensure effective prosecution and maximum recovery of stolen assets from criminal enterprises. The advanced analytical techniques that I had mastered during my career included electron microscopy for examining microscopic document details, chromatographic analysis for determining ink composition and age, spectrographic analysis for identifying paper components and manufacturing characteristics, and computer-enhanced digital analysis for detecting systematic patterns of document manipulation and forgery that were invisible to conventional examination methods. Monier Tambri Pertri. The moment when I realized that every single element of Rebecca's document fraud scheme would be immediately detectable through the forensic arsenal at my disposal was when Pele examined her forged death certificate under high-resolution magnification and discovered systematic irregularities in paper composition, ink formulation, signature simulation, and printing techniques that created an overwhelming pattern of evidence proving systematic forgery and criminal document manipulation that would provide prosecutors with the ironclad forensic proof necessary to secure maximum federal sentences for organized document fraud and systematic elder abuse, involving coordinated criminal enterprises targeting vulnerable elderly victims for financial exploitation. The cosmic perfection of Rebecca Martinez's catastrophic target selection transcended simple irony to achieve what could only be described as the most mathematically precise example of criminal stupidity in the documented history of forensic science, where every single element of her sophisticated document fraud scheme, from her signature forgery techniques to her medical record fabrication methods to her systematic inheritance manipulation strategies, represented textbook examples of the exact criminal methodologies that I had spent 38 years studying, detecting, prosecuting, and training law enforcement agencies to recognize and defeat through comprehensive forensic analysis and expert testimony that had resulted in maximum sentences for hundreds of organized criminal enterprises attempting identical systematic exploitation of elderly victims through document fraud and inheritance theft. The signature forgery techniques that Rebecca employed in creating my fraudulent death certificate demonstrated every Veja classic indicator of conscious simulation that I had identified and documented in my landmark research paper, Systematic Detection of Signature Simulation in Estate Fraud Cases, published in the Journal of Forensic Document Analysis in .1998, and subsequently adopted as required reading for federal investigators and forensic document examiners throughout North America. Her attempts to replicate Dr. Patricia Hendrick's signature showed the characteristic pen pressure variations, stroke hesitation patterns, and systematic deviation from natural writing flow that I had specifically identified as definitive proof of deliberate forgery in my training manual for the FBI Document Analysis Unit. The paper composition and ink formulation that Rebecca used in her forged documents matched exactly the type of anachronistic material substitution that I had identified as the primary detection method for sophisticated inheritance fraud in my comprehensive case study of the Orange County Elder Abuse Network, where organized criminals had systematically targeted wealthy elderly individuals through precisely the same combination of medical record fabrication and death certificate forgery that Rebecca was attempting against someone whose expertise in detecting these exact techniques had resulted in federal prosecution and life sentences for the perpetrators of that criminal enterprise. Rebecca's systematic approach to medical record manipulation demonstrated every element of the coordinated healthcare fraud methodology that I had identified and documented in my collaboration with the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General during the investigation of the San Diego medical fraud conspiracy, where licensed medical professionals had been systematically exploited by criminal networks to provide false medical documentation, supporting fraudulent death certificates for inheritance theft purposes, identical to what Rebecca was attempting through her manipulation of Dr. Hendricks and falsification of my cardiac treatment records. The timing and coordination of Rebecca's inheritance fraud scheme matched precisely the criminal pattern that I had identified in my expert testimony during the prosecution of the Riverside County estate fraud network, where legal professionals had systematically exploited their knowledge of probate procedures to accelerate inheritance transfers through fraudulent death certificates and fabricated medical emergencies, using exactly the same combination of emergency probate filings and systematic family manipulation that Rebecca was employing against someone whose forensic analysis had provided the crucial evidence for maximum federal sentences in that landmark case. The psychological manipulation techniques that Rebecca used to exploit perceived elderly vulnerability demonstrated every element of the systematic elder abuse methodology that I had documented in my research collaboration with the National Institute of Justice on criminal exploitation. Patterns in inheritance fraud networks, where organized criminal enterprises had consistently targeted elderly individuals through precisely the same combination of family relationship exploitation, medical authority manipulation, and systematic isolation from professional oversight that Rebecca was attempting against someone whose expertise in detecting these patterns had contributed to federal legislation strengthening penalties for elder abuse and inheritance fraud. Rebecca's systematic documentation of my apparent cognitive decline and legal incapacity followed exactly the evidence fabrication pattern that I had identified in my landmark court testimony. During the prosecution of the Los Angeles County conservatorship fraud conspiracy, where criminal networks had systematically created false evidence of elderly incapacity to support fraudulent conservatorship proceedings and systematic asset theft, using precisely the same combination of manufactured family concerns, fabricated medical documentation, and systematic legal manipulation that Rebecca was employing against someone whose expert analysis had exposed that criminal enterprise, resulted in recovery of over $50 million in stolen assets. The forged medical documentation that Rebecca systematically created to support her fraudulent death certificate contained every technical irregularity that I had identified as definitive proof of systematic medical fraud in my training program for the Drug Enforcement Administration's Healthcare Fraud Division, including anachronistic medical terminology, inconsistent documentation formatting, systematic signature simulation, and fabricated laboratory results that represented textbook examples of the criminal methodologies that I had trained federal investigators to recognize and prosecute through comprehensive forensic analysis and expert testimony. Rebecca's coordination with offshore financial networks for systematic asset liquidation matched exactly the money laundering methodology that I had helped expose during my collaboration with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network on international inheritance fraud investigations, where organized criminal enterprises had systematically exploited elderly victims through precisely the same combination of document fraud, identity theft, and rapid asset transfer that Rebecca was planning to execute against someone whose expertise in detecting these financial crime patterns had contributed to international law enforcement cooperation and recovery of hundreds of millions of dollars in stolen inheritance assets. The systematic approach that Rebecca used to avoid forensic detection demonstrated every element of the criminal counter-surveillance methodology that I had identified and defeated in my expert consultation with the Secret Service on sophisticated document fraud networks, where organized criminals had attempted to exploit knowledge of forensic analysis techniques to create undetectable forgeries, using precisely the same combination of advanced printing techniques, chemical ink treatment, and systematic evidence destruction that Rebecca was employing against someone whose development of enhanced forensic Rebecca's exploitation of legal procedure knowledge through her paralegal background, represented exactly the type of insider criminal methodology that I had identified and documented in my research collaboration with the American Bar Association on professional ethics violations in estate fraud cases, where legal professionals had systematically exploited their knowledge of court procedures and document requirements to commit sophisticated inheritance fraud, using precisely the same combination of emergency filing procedures, systematic family manipulation, and professional authority exploitation that Rebecca was attempting against someone whose expertise in detecting legal professional fraud had resulted in comprehensive Bar Association policy changes and enhanced oversight procedures. The specific forensic countermeasures that Rebecca attempted to implement in her document preparation demonstrated every technique that I had systematically defeated and documented in my advanced training program for the Federal Bureau of Investigation on emerging threats in sophisticated document fraud, including specialized paper treatment, advanced ink formulation, systematic aging simulation, and microscopic detail replication that represented the most sophisticated criminal techniques available to organized forgery networks, all of which I had specifically developed detection methods to defeat through enhanced analytical procedures and specialized equipment. Rebecca's systematic manipulation of family relationships and emotional exploitation techniques matched exactly the psychological manipulation pattern that I had identified in my expert testimony during the prosecution of the Central Valley Elder Abuse Conspiracy, where organized criminal networks had systematically targeted wealthy elderly individuals. Through precisely the same combination of family relationship exploitation, emotional manipulation, and systematic isolation from professional oversight that Rebecca was employing against someone whose psychological analysis expertise had contributed to maximum sentences for the perpetrators of that criminal enterprise. The international relocation and identity change procedures that Rebecca had prepared for post-fraud escape represented exactly the criminal methodology that I had helped expose during my collaboration with Interpol on international document fraud networks, where organized criminals had systematically exploited global financial systems and identity theft techniques to avoid prosecution for inheritance fraud, using precisely the same combination of offshore banking, false identity documentation that Rebecca was planning to execute against someone whose expertise in international criminal investigation had contributed to the arrest and prosecution. Rebecca's systematic exploitation of medical professional credentials through her manipulation of Dr. Hendricks demonstrated every element of the healthcare fraud methodology that I had identified and documented in my expert consultation with the Department of Health and Human Services on medical professional exploitation and inheritance fraud schemes, where organized criminal networks had systematically manipulated licensed healthcare providers to create false medical documentation supporting fraudulent inheritance claims, using precisely the same combination of patient information exploitation, systematic medical record falsification, and professional authority manipulation that Rebecca was attempting against someone whose expertise in medical fraud detection had resulted in enhanced oversight procedures and criminal penalties for healthcare professionals who participated in inheritance fraud schemes. The specific technological security measures that Rebecca implemented to protect her criminal communications represented exactly the digital forensic challenge that I had helped develop detection methods to defeat during my collaboration with the National Security Agency on sophisticated criminal communication networks, where organized crime enterprises had attempted to exploit advanced encryption and digital security to prevent law enforcement detection of systematic fraud schemes, using precisely the same combination of encrypted communication, digital evidence destruction, and systematic operational security that Rebecca was employing against someone whose expertise in digital forensic analysis had contributed to the development of advanced investigative techniques capable of penetrating the most sophisticated criminal security measures. Rebecca's systematic approach to probate court manipulation through emergency filing procedures matched exactly the legal system exploitation pattern that I had identified and documented in my expert testimony during the prosecution of the Northern California probate fraud network, where organized criminal enterprises had systematically exploited emergency court procedures and judicial oversight limitations to accelerate fraudulent inheritance transfers, using precisely the same combination of emergency filing deadlines, systematic family crisis fabrication, and professional authority exploitation that Rebecca was attempting against someone whose expertise in legal system fraud had contributed to comprehensive probate court procedure reforms and enhanced verification requirements. The comprehensive evidence destruction and operational security. Procedures that Rebecca had implemented to prevent forensic detection represented exactly the criminal counterforensic methodology that I had systematically anticipated and defeated through my development of enhanced analytical techniques and investigation procedures during my collaboration with the Department of Justice on organized crime forensic challenges, where sophisticated criminal networks had attempted to exploit knowledge of forensic science limitations to create undetectable fraud schemes. Using precisely the same combination of systematic evidence elimination, advanced forensic countermeasures, and comprehensive operational security that Rebecca was employing against someone whose anticipation of these exact criminal techniques had resulted in the development of investigative procedures specifically designed to defeat advanced criminal counterforensic measures. Rebecca's coordination of multiple criminal elements, including document fraud, medical manipulation, legal system exploitation, and international money laundering represented exactly the type of organized criminal enterprise that I had identified as the primary threat to elderly victim protection in my landmark research paper, Systematic Analysis of Coordinated Inheritance. Fraud Networks, published in the Federal Law Enforcement Bulletin in 2019, and subsequently adopted as the foundation for federal legislation strengthening penalties and investigative procedures for complex elder abuse schemes involving multiple criminal elements and professional exploitation. The systematic timing and coordination of Rebecca's criminal enterprise, designed to exploit perceived elderly vulnerability during medical crisis and family emotional stress, demonstrated every element of the opportunistic criminal methodology that I had identified and documented in my expert consultation with the National Institute on Aging Criminal Exploitation of Elderly Medical Patients, where organized criminal networks had systematically targeted vulnerable elderly individuals during periods of medical treatment and family crisis, using precisely the same combination of medical information exploitation, family relationship manipulation, and systematic professional authority exploitation that Rebecca was attempting against someone whose expertise in elderly victim protection had contributed to comprehensive healthcare security procedures and enhanced criminal penalties for medical setting exploitation. The moment when the cosmic perfection of Rebecca's catastrophic miscalculation became undeniably clear was when I realized that her systematic attempt to commit the most sophisticated inheritance fraud in Riverside County history was being executed against the one person whose comprehensive expertise, specialized analytical capabilities, federal relationships, and systematic knowledge of every criminal technique she was employing would guarantee not just her immediate detection and prosecution, but the complete exposure and destruction of every aspect of her criminal enterprise through forensic analysis procedures that I had personally developed specifically to defeat the exact type of sophisticated document fraud and inheritance manipulation that she was systematically attempting against someone whose professional legacy had been built on anticipating, detecting, and prosecuting precisely her type of organized criminal methodology. The systematic destruction of Rebecca Martinez's criminal enterprise began at precisely 8:47 a.m. on Tuesday morning, when she confidently entered Riverside County Superior Court, carrying her meticulously forged death certificate, fabricated medical records, and fraudulent inheritance documentation, completely unaware that she was about to present systematic document fraud to probate judge Harrison Mitchell, the same judge who had worked directly with me on over 150 complex fraud cases during our 25 years of professional collaboration, who had personally witnessed my forensic analysis techniques expose dozens of sophisticated forgery networks, and who would immediately recognize both the criminal methodology and the supposedly deceased forensic expert whose document analysis expertise had been instrumental in his successful prosecution of organized inheritance fraud conspiracies throughout his distinguished judicial career. The moment of cosmic justice arrived when Rebecca approached the bench with professional confidence, presenting Fauna herself as the grieving daughter-in-law seeking emergency probate authorization for Marcus Blackwood's inheritance, following the, quote, tragic sudden death of his mother Eleanor from cardiac complications at her isolated lakeside cabin. Judge Mitchell accepted her forged death certificate with the makaufrasiekest routine efficiency of someone who had processed thousands of legitimate probate estate cases. But his professional demeanor changed instantly when he recognized Dr. Patricia Hendrick's forged signature and the systematic irregularities in medical documentation that I had trained him to identify during our collaborative work on the San Diego medical fraud conspiracy investigation 15 years earlier. The comprehensive forensic analysis that I had secretly conducted on Rebecca's forged documents had revealed every element of systematic criminal fraud that would be necessary for immediate federal prosecution and maximum sentencing under organized crime statutes. Her death certificate contained 17 distinct forensic irregularities, including anachronistic paper composition, systematic signature simulation, fabricated medical examiner certifications, and chemical ink formulations that were completely inconsistent with legitimate Riverside Medical Center documentation, creating an overwhelming pattern of evidence that would provide prosecutors with ironclad proof of premeditated document fraud and systematic inheritance theft. Judge Mitchell's immediate recognition of the fraudulent documentation triggered the emergency forensic investigation protocol that he and I had developed during our collaboration on complex fraud cases, resulting in his discretionary order for comprehensive document authentication and systematic verification of all medical claims before any inheritance authorization could be considered. Rebecca's confident presentation of fraudulent documents had unknowingly activated the exact investigative procedures that I had designed specifically to expose sophisticated document fraud and protect elderly victims from systematic inheritance theft through organized criminal enterprises. The federal investigation that commenced within hours of Judge Mitchell's authentication order represented the culmination of investigative procedures and professional relationships that I had systematically developed during my career in forensic document analysis. FBI Special Agent Sarah Rodriguez, whom I had personally trained in advanced document fraud detection during her early career, arrived at the courthouse with a comprehensive forensic analysis team equipped with portable microscopy systems, spectroscopic analysis equipment, and digital imaging capabilities that would provide immediate on-site verification of the systematic forgery and criminal manipulation that Rebecca had attempted to present as legitimate legal documentation. The systematic exposure of Rebecca's criminal enterprise began with Agent Rodriguez's preliminary examination of the forged death certificate using portable magnification equipment that immediately revealed the signature simulation patterns, paper composition irregularities, and systematic chemical inconsistencies that I had identified during my covert analysis of Rebecca's fraudulent documentation. Her confident assertion of my death from cardiac complications crumbled. Julia can sigh within minutes, as forensic analysis revealed systematic evidence of document forgery, and Julia Gaveri, criminal manipulation that would form the foundation for federal charges carrying mandatory minimum sentences without possibility of parole. The comprehensive scope of federal charges that were filed against Rebecca Martinez within 48 hours of her courthouse appearance included first-degree attempted murder through systematic medical manipulation, organized document fraud involving forged government documents, systematic inheritance theft and financial fraud, elder abuse with intent to commit financial exploitation, identity theft and systematic impersonation of deceased persons, conspiracy to commit murder for financial gain, money laundering and systematic asset manipulation, professional fraud involving exploitation of legal credentials, medical fraud through systematic manipulation of healthcare providers, and federal racketeering charges connecting her crimes to organized criminal enterprises, targeting elderly victims for systematic financial exploitation. The asset forfeiture procedures that accompanied Rebecca's arrest included immediate seizure of all property and financial accounts connected to her criminal enterprise, comprehensive freezing of her bank accounts and investment portfolios, confiscation of the luxury vehicle and expensive jewelry that she had purchased in anticipation of inheritance windfall, systematic recovery of gambling debts and casino transactions that had motivated her criminal activity, and seizure of the house that she and Marcus had purchased using anticipated inheritance money, leaving her completely destitute and financially destroyed even before her criminal trial began. The systematic destruction of Rebecca's professional credentials and legal career included immediate suspension of her paralegal license pending federal prosecution, comprehensive investigation by the State Bar Association resulting in permanent prohibition from any legal practice or court representation, systematic review of all previous cases and legal documents she had prepared at Hartwell & Associates resulting in potential additional fraud charges, and permanent revocation of all professional certifications and legal credentials that would prevent any future employment in legal services or court-related activities. The federal prosecution strategy that was implemented against Rebecca's criminal enterprise utilized comprehensive forensic evidence that I had systematically collected during months of covert investigation, including detailed photographic documentation of her document preparation and forgery activities, comprehensive audio recordings of her conversations about systematic medical manipulation and inheritance fraud, systematic analysis of her financial transactions and gambling debts that had motivated her criminal activity, and irrefutable forensic proof of document forgery and systematic fraud that would ensure maximum sentences under federal organized. The expert testimony that I provided during Rebecca's federal trial included comprehensive presentation of forensic analysis results proving systematic document forgery, detailed explanation of criminal methodologies and organized fraud patterns that Rebecca had employed, systematic comparison of her criminal techniques with known organized crime enterprises that had targeted elderly victims, and professional assessment of the sophisticated nature of her criminal planning that justified maximum federal sentences under organized crime and elder abuse statutes. The international investigation that was triggered by Rebecca's systematic money laundering and offshore asset transfer preparations revealed connections to organized criminal networks operating across multiple countries, resulting in coordinated law enforcement action by Interpol and international financial crime units that expose systematic inheritance fraud operations targeting elderly victims in North America, Europe, and Australia, leading to the arrest and prosecution of dozens of additional criminals and recovery of millions of dollars in stolen inheritance assets. The comprehensive medical investigation that followed Rebecca's arrest included systematic review of all patients under Dr. Patricia Hendricks' care during the period of Rebecca's manipulation, resulting in enhanced security procedures at Riverside Medical Center, and comprehensive review of medical record authentication protocols to prevent future exploitation of healthcare providers by organized criminal enterprises. Dr. Hendricks faced professional discipline and enhanced oversight requirements but avoided criminal charges due to her unwitting participation in Rebecca's systematic manipulation scheme. The civil damages that were awarded against Rebecca's criminal enterprise included comprehensive compensation for attempted murder and systematic elder abuse, punitive damages for organized criminal activity and systematic fraud, restitution for all legal costs and forensic analysis expenses incurred during the investigation and prosecution, and additional civil penalties under federal elder abuse statutes that resulted in judgment amounts exceeding any assets that Rebecca possessed or could accumulate during her lifetime, ensuring permanent financial destruction. And for the systematic investigation of Rebecca's criminal associates and gambling connections revealed organized crime networks that had been systematically targeting vulnerable elderly individuals for inheritance fraud, leading to expanded federal prosecution involving dozens of additional criminals and comprehensive dismantling of organized elder abuse enterprises operating throughout California and neighboring states. The investigation resulted in recovery of over $200 million in stolen assets and implementation of enhanced protection procedures for elderly citizens vulnerable to systematic financial exploitation. The educational impact of Rebecca's case extended far beyond individual prosecution to create comprehensive training materials for law enforcement agencies, legal professionals, healthcare providers, and elder abuse prevention organizations, studying her criminal methodology as a definitive example of sophisticated inheritance fraud and the catastrophic consequences awaiting criminals who attempted to exploit elderly victims through systematic document fraud and professional manipulation. The federal sentencing that concluded Rebecca's prosecution resulted in life imprisonment without possibility of parole for attempted murder and systematic elder abuse, with additional consecutive sentences for document fraud, inheritance theft, money laundering, and organized criminal activity that would ensure she never again had the opportunity to exploit vulnerable elderly victims or commit systematic financial crimes. Her case became legal precedent for maximum sentences in complex elder abuse prosecutions involving organized criminal enterprises and professional credential exploitation. The broader impact of Rebecca's prosecution on legislative and policy development included enhanced federal penalties for inheritance fraud involving elderly victims, strengthened professional oversight requirements for legal and medical professionals with access to vulnerable populations, improved authentication procedures for critical legal documents including death certificates and estate planning materials, and enhanced coordination between law enforcement agencies and forensic specialists in detecting and prosecuting sophisticated document fraud and organized elder abuse schemes. The systematic reforms that were implemented throughout California's legal and medical systems as a result of Rebecca's case included mandatory forensic verification procedures for emergency probate filings, enhanced background investigation requirements for legal professionals with access to elderly clients, comprehensive training programs for healthcare providers on recognizing and reporting systematic manipulation and fraud attempts, and improved coordination between probate courts and law enforcement agencies in detecting and preventing inheritance fraud targeting elderly victims. The personal vindication that I experienced through Rebecca's comprehensive prosecution and permanent imprisonment represented the culmination of a career dedicated to protecting elderly victims from systematic exploitation and ensuring that sophisticated criminal enterprises faced maximum consequences for their crimes against vulnerable populations. Her catastrophic miscalculation in targeting someone whose entire professional legacy had been built on detecting and prosecuting exactly her type of criminal methodology had resulted in justice that exceeded even my most optimistic expectations for criminal accountability and victim protection. The systematic destruction of organized criminal networks that resulted from Rebecca's prosecution created lasting impact on criminal enterprises throughout the western United States, with federal investigations leading to the arrest and prosecution of hundreds of additional criminals and the recovery of hundreds of millions of dollars in stolen assets. The comprehensive law enforcement response demonstrated the serious federal commitment to protecting elderly citizens from systematic financial exploitation and the devastating consequences awaiting criminal enterprises that targeted vulnerable populations for organized theft and abuse. The moment when Rebecca Martinez realized the full scope of her catastrophic miscalculation occurred during the reading of her federal sentence, when she finally understood that her systematic attempt to commit inheritance fraud against a vulnerable elderly woman had actually been executed against the most respected forensic document examiner in the state's criminal justice system, whose comprehensive expertise, federal relationships, and systematic knowledge of criminal methodology had guaranteed not just her detection and prosecution, but the complete destruction of her criminal enterprise and permanent imprisonment for attempting to exploit someone whose entire professional career had been dedicated to protecting elderly victims from exactly the type of sophisticated criminal exploitation that she had systematically planned and attempted to execute. The final irony of Rebecca's complete destruction was that her desperate attempt to escape financial ruin through criminal exploitation of apparent elderly vulnerability had resulted in far worse consequences than her original gambling debts and professional misconduct would have produced, transforming manageable financial and legal problems into federal criminal convictions and life imprisonment that eliminated any possibility of financial recovery, professional rehabilitation, or personal freedom, while providing a definitive example to other potential criminals of the catastrophic consequences awaiting those who attempted to exploit elderly victims through systematic fraud, document forgery, and inheritance theft. The lasting legacy of Rebecca Martinez's prosecution continues to serve as a powerful deterrent to organized criminal enterprises, considering systematic exploitation of elderly victims, while the comprehensive forensic analysis techniques and investigative procedures that exposed her criminal methodology have been adopted by law enforcement agencies internationally for detecting and prosecuting sophisticated document fraud and inheritance theft schemes. Targeting vulnerable populations, ensuring that her catastrophic miscalculation in criminal target selection has contributed to enhanced protection for elderly citizens and more. Effective prosecution of organized elder abuse enterprises worldwide. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.